I'm Chris with ToolboxDIY, and welcome to the gun show. Not just any gun show, we're bringing you the most informative gun show with the least amount of Second Amendment controversy. We're talking nail guns today, specifically pneumatic nail guns. We're going to cover all of the various nail guns on the market. We're going to cover pin nailers, staplers, brad nailers, finish nailers, framing nailers, and a few specialty guns. So let's jump right in. We'll start with the smallest gun and we'll work our way up to the larger one. This here is a pin nailer. Pin nailers take 21 or 23 gauge pin nails. This one here is a 23 gauge. These are the smallest nails that you can find. They're headless. So when they go into the material, they leave a very small hole that's quite easy to cover up. You won't even know it's there once you've covered it up with some paint or a little bit of filler. Now the downside is these pins are so small they don't provide a lot of strength. So it's for very delicate trim work where you don't want to split any wood, but you do have to be mindful that if you're looking for strength, this is likely not it. Now the length of pin nails that you can use on these can range from gun to gun. This one goes up to 1 inch, but you can find guns that go all the way down to 3/8 of an inch, even above 2 inches. Now I will say, if you want a pin nailer that fires the longer pin nails, you're going to pay more money. The ones that shoot over 2-inch pins are quite expensive. So my recommendation would be to try to find one that has the largest range of lengths that fits within your budget. So let's take a look at the pins that are used with these. As I mentioned, there's no head on these 23 gauge pinners. In fact, it's rather difficult to discern the point from the head. That's why this manufacturer puts arrows to let you know how to insert it properly into the gun. As you can see, they're just tiny. Next up, we have a pneumatic stapler. This stapler uses T50 staples. These are the staples you'll typically find being used in the manual hand staples that you might be familiar with. If you have a lot of stapling to do, I highly recommend getting one of these. Your hands will thank you. You can also find other types of staplers. There's a crown molding stapler, which is specifically for attaching crown molding. You can also find a fine wire stapler, which is pretty much a cross between the 23 gauge pin nailer and a stapler. I like the T50 staples. It's kind of an all-purpose staple. It's not really something that I use for attaching trim or doing any sort of furniture, cabinet work. It's just kind of an all-around stapler. If you're looking for something for crown molding, furniture, something like that, then you might want to look into the specialty staplers like the crown molding or the fine wire stapler. Let's have a look at the staples used here. You're probably already familiar with these. Not much to the T50 staples. You've probably seen these before. You can get them in varying depths, 1/4 inch up to 3/4, I believe. Next up, we have the brad nailer. This is an 18 gauge brad nailer. Brads are a type of finish nail. They're typically used for trim, moldings, and casings, but they can also be used for paneling, furniture repair, or attaching any delicate pieces that might have a tendency to split. They're not quite as strong as the 15 or 16 gauge finish nailers, but I think it's a good catch-all nail gun to have. If you're only considering 1 or 2 finish nail guns, I would recommend considering one of these. Let's have a look at what a 18 gauge brad nail looks like. You can see that there's a slight head on these 18 gauge brads, not quite as large as that's found on the 16 gauge finish nails. These are 1 inch. You can buy them in varying lengths. Now we're moving up to the finish nailer. This here is a 16 gauge finish nailer. You can also find 15 gauge. The only real difference being that the 15 gauge nails have slightly more holding power than the 16 gauge. But these 16 gauge guns tend to be a little bit lighter. These finish nails are typically used for cabinet and furniture making, picture frame assembly, as well as attaching more heavy-duty molding. It can also be used for installing tongue and groove material on a wall or on a ceiling, but not recommended for a floor. If you're in the market for one of these, you'll find 2 types. The straight nailer, that's what this is, and you'll also find an angled, where the magazine angles up like this. The advantage to that is you can get the gun into tighter spaces. which may be beneficial to you. I think the angle guns typically cost a little bit more money than the straight nailers. Let's have a look at what an 18 gauge finish nail looks like. Here are two different lengths of 16 gauge finish nails. You can see they have quite a substantial head on these, and that's why these can be used in many different places and still provide quite a bit of strength. Now that we've covered the finish nailers, let's move on to the framing nailer. These are the heavy-duty guns, the Mac Daddy of nail guns. These are the nailers that replace traditional hammer and framing nails. As far as home repair goes, you might not need one of these. However, if you have a large project or renovation where you would be driving a lot of nails, this could potentially save you time. This particular framing nailer shoots nails ranging from 6 penny to 12 penny, ranging in lengths of 2 inches to 3.5 inches. When you're shopping for a nail gun, a framing nail gun such as this, you'll notice a reference to full head and clipped head nailers. This is a full head nailer. The difference between the two is in the actual nail. In a clipped head nail, there's a small notch taken out of the head of the nail, which allows nails to be placed closer together, so you can get more capacity in the magazine. This is really for high volume jobs where contractors don't want to take the time to stop and reload the gun. Personally, as a DIYer, I recommend the full head nailer. If you drive a nail in the wrong place and you need to take it out, the full head nails are a little easier to remove. But if you have a large job where time matters, then by all means you might want to consider a clipped head nailer. Let's have a look at these nails. Here are two different lengths of framing nails. As I mentioned, these are full head. The clipped head nails have about that much taken out of them, and you can get many more nails in one of these cartridges with the clipped head. These are basically just standard nails with this plastic to allow them to be inserted into the magazine. Now let's have a look at what all of these fasteners look like when they're actually driven into material. Starting with a 23 gauge pinner, you see how tiny that hole is. And then moving on, ignore this, that was a misfire. Here's a T50 staple. We have our 18 gauge brad, which is still a pretty small hole. You can't really see the head, but it's in there. It's recessed a bit. And then here's the 16 gauge finish nail, so you can actually see the head on that one. And then here's the framing nailer with a 7 penny nail. Well, that covers the nail guns that I own and I use, but I want to talk briefly about specialty guns. I already mentioned the Crown stapler when I talked about the T50 stapler. That's an example of a specialty gun. You may also find upholstery staplers if you ever need to do any upholstery work. There's also hardwood flooring staplers. These are special guns used for driving hardwood flooring staples into tongue and groove boards found in hardwood floors. There are also roofing staplers. These are very similar to framing guns, except they have a round canister rather than a straight magazine. They hold quite a few nails for very large roofing jobs. For the most part, you probably won't need a specialty gun, but if you have something that requires a lot of fasteners and it doesn't fall in the category of any of the guns I've covered here, then by all means do some research and see if there's something out there that will help you. Well, that covers the nail guns for today, but I want to conclude by talking about how much money you might want to spend on a nail gun, as well as choosing a compressor. For me, I really don't use these guns that frequently, so I can't justify buying top-of-the-line name brand nail guns. However, if you know that you're going to use these guns frequently, then it might be worth the extra cash in buying a more expensive gun. When I do want to buy a name brand gun, I typically look for factory refurbished deals, or sometimes I might look online for a lightly used nail gun. Now, as you probably figured out, all of these guns will require an air compressor. When choosing an air compressor, you want to look for two things: PSI and SCFM. PSI, or pounds per square inch, is the amount of pressure that an air compressor can provide. SCFM, or standard cubic foot per minute, is the amount of air volume that a compressor can provide. All of these guns will tell you what their SCFM requirements are, and it's typically at 90 PSI. Personally, as a DIYer, I think the best compressor is a 6-gallon pancake compressor. This can provide up to 150 psi, which can be adjusted to a lower level, and the SCFM ranges from 2.6 to 2.8. That will drive all of these guns. It's actually not adequate for this framing nailer. It requires almost 3 times that. But I can actually cheat. It will allow me to fire a few nails before I have to wait to let the compressor recharge. But for you, I think just pay attention to what the SCFM requirement is of the guns that you will use frequently and match that to a compressor that can achieve that amount of output at the given PSI that you'll be operating your gun at. Well, that concludes the Toolbox DIY first annual gun show. I want to thank you for taking the time to join us, and I hope we've given you the knowledge to help stock your toolbox with a nail gun that fits your needs. I'll see you next time.